Well, the name is Pat Thrasher. I am the president of the Western Colorado chapter of the National Railway Historical Society and manager of the Glenwood Railroad Museum. Railroads historically facilitated a westward migration. They had their environmental impacts, they had their cultural impacts, but they also became a very colorful part of the history of the West especially. Prior to 1887, if you wanted to come to Glenwood Springs, it was a challenge. Conventional wisdom was Glenwood Canyon was impassable. Even the Native American trails went around the canyon rather than through it. That all changed in October of 1887 when the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad finally arrived here. They were in a bit of a race with another railroad, the Colorado Midland, and won that race by about 4 months. 1887, railroad construction is still largely done by hand, and much of it by immigrant labor. A whole host of people and a whole host of cultures were involved in construction of the Denver and Rio Grande, as was the case with many of the western railroads at that same time period. Coming down through the canyon, they had to carve out a bench on which to put the railroad. There were a number of tunnels that had to be hand cut, essentially. A lot of folks think Glenwood was the destination, and it was not. The destination was Aspen because of the mining activity. Glenwood Springs just happened to be along the way. At the same time, there were some things here in Glenwood that attracted people, the hot springs, the scenery. Several presidents would come here, most notably Teddy Roosevelt, who used the Hotel Colorado as his Western White House during one of his hunting trips. The first station here in Glenwood Springs, in fact, was typical wood frame railroad architecture. It was located about 4 blocks west of where we are today. You know, the first road into Glenwood really didn't occur until after 1900. And so if you really were coming to Glenwood Springs, you came by train. The depot was the front door to the community. It was the front door to the Roaring Fork Valley. In the early 1900s, folks started putting some pressure on the Denver and Rio Grande to build a new depot, one that was a little bit more representative of the images that people had of their community. They hired an architect who already had some local experience. His name's Theodore von Rosenberg. He had previously done the design work for the bathhouse and hot springs pool for the Devereaux family. This building is completed in the late spring of 1904. It was designed to the social standards of the day, and that included 2 waiting rooms. The railroad practiced gender segregation, as did most railroads of the day. So they had a men's waiting room and a ladies' waiting room. Train travel has been evolutionary. It was, in the beginning, utilitarian. I mean, it was essential, particularly if you were going to travel any great distance. And a lot of those early passenger cars were not all that comfortable. The suspension's a little rough. The benches are a little rough. They're heated with coal stoves in the corner. Rail passenger travel sort of evolved from an absolute essential to something that became a little bit more sophisticated. And we start to see, into late 1930s, introduction of the streamliners. Stainless steel, streamlined, shiny, diesel electric, none of this coal smoke. That sparks a whole revolution in rail travel. Finally, then, the original California Zephyr in 1949. The Cal Zephyr was one of the first trains to employ Vistadome cars. And tradition has it that Glenwood Canyon, in fact, is responsible for the inspiration of the Vistadome cars for which the Cal Zephyr and other trains became so well known. When air travel becomes a lot more reliable and we're building interstate highways, there's a movement afoot by most of the railroads to get out of the passenger business, and yet there are a lot of people who want to continue riding trains, and that's when we see the birth of the Amtrak. One of the trains that survives is the California Zephyr. It looks a little different than the original Zephyr, but it's still here. You can get on the train, you can kick back. I like to encourage folks to put the books away, put the devices away. It's a way to see some parts of Colorado, some parts of the country in general that you don't easily see from an airplane or from a car. I would like to think that more and more people will embrace rail travel as an alternative. For folks who are considering coming to Glenwood Springs, whether it's for a weekend or a week or whatever, if they want to get connected with the history of this area, and particularly with the rail history, they need to include a stop at the Glenwood Railroad Museum. We're here and ready to help introduce folks to what this community and what this area is all about from the perspective of that really colorful railroad history.